Hey everyone, we're heading into the Dreamspeakers Festival Society meet and greet. We're gonna make a stew, so let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back. Here we are today with Dreamspeakers Festival Society, and we are talking with Joyce and Christine. How are you both doing today?
Very well.
Yes, I'm doing really good. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. We're so excited. And we are going to be making a special dish today. What are we making?
We are making Rubaboo Stew.
Awesome. And what is Rubaboo Stew?
Rubaboo Stew is a Métis dish cooked amongst many Métis people, but originated back in the fur trade industry when voyageurs and coureurs de bois from French Canada came over to be involved in the fur trade. And of course, they had to have something to eat, and they had to have something that was fairly light. One of the things that they really relied on was pemmican, but they also relied on Rubaboo stew. So they would put into their Rubaboo stew some sort of fat, and we're going to substitute the fat with bacon here. And they had to put into the stew something fairly light and nutritious. So they couldn't carry pounds and pounds and sacks of food, so they would get dried peas, which didn't take up a whole lot of room and was easily packed. And they would also get dried corn from the settlements down east. The native settlements there grew a very large amount of corn. So they would have those, but you can also add today's vegetables. Like some people just put in carrots, potatoes, and turnips, but we're going to go back a little bit more traditionally. They would find onions on the trail because they grow in the prairies quite prolifically, as well as what you call the prairie turnip and other things like that. So they would dig those out. Voyageurs were legitimate licensed traders. The coureurs de bois were kind of a fringe gang, and they didn't really follow the rules. And they are the more adventuresome of the lot. And I think I descend from the coureurs de bois side. So having said that, I should mention roux is actually a French and Cajun term, and it is a thickening that you make by combining fat and flour. Now, today we take shortcuts. We just mix flour in some sort of liquid and pour it in the stew. But if you're going to make it really good, shrimp étouffée, you have to do the roux properly. Ooh. So the Cajuns, as we know, came from Acadia, which was a French settlement. So that's how all of those things sort of knit together. Roux means thickening. Abou means soup in the Algonquin language. And the Algonquin language goes from Quebec right across Ontario and across the prairies into Alberta. And so that term, abou, was pretty consistent across the realm. And as we know, Métis were in that area of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta. So, do we want to get on with making it?
Yes, please.
So, we were very lucky. We had an ambitious person do some of this for us.
Isn't it true that having a little jar of bacon grease on your cookum's cupboard is so traditional? I was thinking about that just yesterday when I was making bacon. I was like, Grandma always used to have a little jar of the bacon grease for any use.
In this one that we're doing, we'll put the thickener in last. So we'll just put all of this stuff in and stir it up and just let it cook. So that's all we have to do for now.
Perfect.
And we can let it cook.
While it's cooking, would you folks mind just telling us a bit about yourselves?
Sure.
I am a Métis person from my Métis community is Gruard up in northern Alberta. There was a community next to it called Little Sweden, and my dad came up there And he found the most beautiful woman in Grouard and married her. And she was a Métis from Grouard, and they had come from all over, Fort Chip, Fort Vermilion, and they all ended up around Grouard because there was land and stuff there. But we also had, I have ancestors in the Métis community of Jasper House, and they all got together. My grandpa was born in St. Albert, and they ended up with us, half Swedish, half Métis, but Métis.
And I'm Métis. My family, my Métis side comes from Kikino Métis settlement, and my grandmother was First Nations from Saddle Lake Cree Nation, and my grandfather, through his experiences both in the war and in similarly, getting to know the First Nations communities around Saddle Lake and whatnot, he became very aware of the inequities of livelihood. And he took all of his training from the military, from organizing unions, and he put his best foot forward back in 1967 and became the president of the Métis Nation of Alberta, Mr. Stan Daniels. And he was the president at various times through the 60s, 70s, and was running again actually in 83 when he passed away. But I have a very strong Métis, heritage and culture. My mom took up his mantle in the 80s and became the youngest and first female ever voted into the executive of the Métis Nation of Alberta. She was the vice president. So there's some big political shoes to fill, and certainly like what you said, Joyce, about always being a pot of stew. I remember at those old Métis assemblies when I was a child, and we'd all camp out. They used to be all camping, and they'd have the big assembly, in some sort of hockey rink or something like that. But outside in the fields would be all the camps, and Grandpa always used to have a big pot of stew going all the time through the night, because there'd be people who'd come, and they'd come to talk about their political needs and their community's needs, and that was always a really beautiful part of what I remembered about the Métis assemblies, was that hospitality that you mentioned, that social aspect. And now even when I go camping with my friends, they always know on that third day I'm going to make a big pot of stew, and everyone's going to have some stew to eat.
That's so sweet. And what other traditions do you have or hope to pass on?
For me, it's about the music, like there isn't an Aboriginal family that I know of that doesn't have music in their lives in some ways. And I've been involved in the arts community for over 45 years, and that's one of the things that I've learned, especially working in Indigenous arts, is that Indigenous artists are multifaceted. There's always going to be music, storytelling. Like some of the storytelling is just like amazing, beautiful, consummate craftsmanship of how to tell a tale. One of the things that I love that we're making a Rubaboo Stew with you today is that one of the first festivals that I ever produced, not the first, but one of the first, is the Rubaboo Arts Festival. And I had it ran for 1 year, and then the Workshop West Playwrights Theatre started it, and they asked Indigenous people to take it over because it's an Indigenous arts festival. So I said, yes, for sure. And we ended up having to go back and why did you call it Rubaboo? Like, it's an arts festival. Like, I've actually met some people who think it's a cooking festival. I'm like, it's not a cooking festival. It's not. Should we change the name? And in fact, what we did was we sat with some Métis elders, and we talked about what is the purpose and meaning of having that name. And we talked, just as Joyce said, right? It's the food that they would have on the trap line. And it was not only the food that you would have maybe in February in the darkest, coldest winter hours, but it's the food that not only feeds you physically, but feeds your spirit. That you will see the spring come, that you will last on the trail. And for us, that's what the arts are. It's the food that feeds our spirit. It's the music, the theater, the dance, the storytelling, the craftsmanship, the community, all of those good things that all go into that sacred pot of stew. So that's really meaningful to me. And I know from my own Métis heritage, the moments where I remember my grandparents and that hospitality is something that I'm trying to bring, passed down to my children. I have a son who's just going to be 18 this year, and he almost every year at school when they cover something in social studies, he puts on, his Métis sash. He wears a ribbon shirt to school, and he will bring artifacts to share, like show and tell, his drum, what he knows about the culture, and he has a great opportunity to share that with his classmates. And what I love is that it's something that I can see that he has some pride in. And it was actually something I remember my grandfather saying that you're a proud Métis is, it's redundant. If you're a Métis, you are proud.
Yeah.
It's not loud.
In the days when I was raised, which is almost 80 years ago now, they didn't call people Métis. We were known as breeds. They called us breeds, which was a derogatory term. But my father, the Swedish guy, he was such a historian, and he read up on everything. And he taught us all about the Métis and, the Louis Riel resistance, and talked about everything that happened. So when we would go to school, and they'd be talking about this history, and we'd be on the wrong side because we're defending it, right? Because of what my father taught us. And it was quite different back then. So, yeah, it was a fair amount more of discrimination, I think, than now. Some of the things that you see now, like ribbon skirts, you didn't see a lot of back then. The Métis sash, which is a big symbol of being a Métis that they wear. I only saw one old guy wear one, and it was the dirtiest thing around, and he used it for everything.
Yeah.
which they're supposed to use it for everything.
Yeah, and that's the cool thing about the Métis sash, is it's not just a beautiful, colorful thing that people would wear to denote their identity, but it was a tool that they used all the time. And once you start to look at it as a tool, you go, oh, how do we get by in modern days without wearing our sashes all the time?
Yeah, well, they'd carry that sack of corn and peas in that Métis sash over their shoulder, put it in a sash and carry it. So that's exactly what it was. Now they don't use it that way, but it's a very powerful symbol of the Métis.
Ingenuity, for sure.
Yeah.
And so both of you are involved in the Dreamspeakers Festival Society. What was the inspiration in starting Dreamspeakers?
Oh, well, in the way back machine, I know that when in the 80s, the first Indigenous theater company was created in Toronto, Native Earth Performing Arts. It's still in existence today, still going strong. One of the founders of that was Thompson Highway, who's a playwright. And he prophesied that once they had established one, that there would be the country would be sparkled with all sorts of Indigenous arts. It took a bit of that going, but I think that had a lot of, that spark drove a lot of other people. And at the time in the 80s, there was, for lack of a better word, like a renaissance of Indigenous filmmaking and producing. And in Edmonton, and specifically in Alberta, we have for a long time been a key place to do filmmaking. Even if you're from United States, a lot of productions would come here, and there were more and more actors, more and more directors, and Dreamspeakers had an opportunity to celebrate those works. In the early 80s, the American Film Institute in San Francisco started the first Indigenous Film Festival. And then we came up and we were like, that's a great idea, let's do that. And so that's kind of where the impetus came. What they wanted to do was to have that same opportunity to recognize and acknowledge the good work of Indigenous artists. And then, of course, to celebrate and appreciate as well.
Should say where the Dreamspeakers name came from.
Oh, that's a great one. Okay, so wonderful name for our organization and our film festival. It came about, there was an Inuk filmmaker, Raymond Neka'new'ak, who came down to get his training, to do filmmaking. And when he went back up north to tell, his community what he'd been doing, and he was speaking with his, old people, and they didn't have a word for filmmaking in their language. And as he was describing to them what he was doing, they said, oh, it sounds like you're dream talking. You're taking your dreams and you're talking them into reality. And so we thought that was a brilliant name for the festival. And we said, yes, we are dream speakers. So we are making our dreams come true. We are excited by other people's dreams, and we are making them into reality. And like I said, celebrating them as much as we can.
I love that. That's such a, wow, that's incredible.
Thank you.
So our whole mission has just evolved down to a simple phrase, which is to amplify Indigenous storytellers.
What could folks expect if they were to come to the Dreamspeakers Festival?
Well, first of all, great art. One of the sort of modus operandi that we engage in whenever we're presenting a work, whether it's film or what have you, we try to take a holistic approach. So if we're doing the film festival, we'll have our festival at a theater, but we also look for unique site-specific screening opportunities. So whether that could be, we have done screenings in our alleyway, and we have done screenings in various different places where it's meant to create an intimacy, create a unique viewing opportunity. We find that there's definitely things we can do to emulate that Hollywood glamour, have a red carpet. I think there's a little bit of excitement like that. But we also really try to have something for the artists themselves, whether they are workshops, artistic workshops, perhaps, and for myself, our programmer, director of programming, Aretha Greatrix, she's not only programming our film festival, she's a filmmaker herself. And in the last several years, she's also been increasing her footprint in the Indigenous gaming community and pushing some of those boundaries, like with Twitch, that they have Indigenous Awareness Day or month, that they're aware that so many gamers are Indigenous, that there's more platforms for them to not only have access to, but feel that they're safe environments, and they can add their own storytelling, whether they are developing, games and stuff like that. We've looked at how do we were always about, recorded film and media, radio and things like that, but the very technology has changed in the last 30 years, and people have access to making films on their phones, and so we actually had a previous board of director, Arsène Buffin, fantastic photographer, amazing gentleman himself, and he said, maybe you should do something with all the people doing those TikToks, and my first impetus was, oh, I don't think TikTok needs us, but then I realized it's not about whether TikTok needs us, or it's about how are we celebrating Indigenous content creators and recognizing them and doing what we can to increase that community and have opportunities to dialogue, where those are entirely different variables. I'm not a gamer or content creator myself in terms of online content, but I've learned so much when we've invited really amazing influencers, and so we have our workshops, but we also really try to have good panel discussions, and my favorite is community dialogues, where we can actually say, you don't always need to hear from the experts and the artists, but also what do you as a community member think about youth training, training for youth, or where do you think, right now we have very much on a lot of people's minds and hearts and tongues is the identity scandals, the pretendians, and we are charged as an organization that recognizes Indigenous creativity. How are we identifying people as Indigenous? How are we making the call out to filmmakers? So every year we kind of refine our call out, the vocabulary that we're using, and seeing how that creates, what intake we can get from that. And then it's brilliant when we can then share that with the community and hear what they think. So always being touching stone with the community as much as possible.
But can I say, just from an audience point of view, about the International Film Festival, I love that festival. We get films submitted from all over the world. And the one lesson that comes through over and over and over again is how Indigenous people have been treated by settlers or colonizers, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, the Sumi in northern Sweden, no matter where, Japan, no matter where you are, the stories are all the same. And I know what I really enjoyed the most when I go to this festival is going to the kids, the films we put together for the kids, because they will watch sad stories, happy stories, teachable stories, and they react so emotionally to them, like they get right in it. Yeah. I have my granddaughter saying, "No more kayam," because kayam is a word that in Cree that you let things go. And so somebody will do something and they would say kayam many times, let it go. But she saw a film called No More Kayam, and she said, "That's horrible what happened." And then she was going, "No more kayam."
I think that it's such an important point that you bring up, Joyce, is what our children and youth can take away from seeing the art of their community and their elders, and beyond them. I remember being a young teenager myself, and I was involved in the powwow community, and my grandmother, who ran the White Braid Society, would always work really hard to have opportunities internationally for the youth. So at 13 years old, I got to go to Japan for the Expo 85. And
Excuse me.
sorry, you bet. And one of the things that I felt was I felt like a movie star. They had the red carpet out for us. The people would come to our events. They'd ask for my autograph. And when I came back, I realized there are people around the world who care about my culture. And even if sometimes it feels like we are discriminated here at home or in your neighborhood or what have you with certain systemic, issues, there are people around the world who do care and who appreciate. And having that opportunity makes it opens you up a little bit more.
How was the stew?
Excellent.
Excellent.
I must say so myself.
That's fantastic.
Awesome. While we, I guess, serve it, I'll ask you our last question. It doesn't have to be specific to the festival or anything like that, but what would you say is the best piece of advice you've received throughout your life? Both of you.
You go first.
I don't know. There's so many people. My father, I would talk about stuff. He called me Dream Girl. And I would talk about stuff and say, "I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that." And he'd always say, "I know you will, I know you can." And I guess that's one of the things. The other thing was I trained as a nurse. And there was one lady that her voice is in my head still. And she would always say, "Put yourself in the patient's place." So throughout my career, I always put myself in the patient's place. Yeah. And that's how you approach it every time.
That's beautiful. I'm going to do that too. I think for me, I was a fairly young woman. Again, it was a woman I was associated with, and she saw I was really upset one day. And she came to me and she said, "Why are you so upset?" I said, "Well, I should be able to fix this." And she looked at me and she had that little sparkle in her eye and she said, "Where there are expectations, there's little room for joy." And I use that one a lot. I mean, I changed it a little bit. She said, "Where there's expectations, there's no room for joy." But I changed it a little bit because, depends on the person and the place and the thing. But I find that if I am upset with something, it's usually because I'm expecting that I can fix it, I can do something with it. And sometimes we don't have that. Sometimes we have to just understand it. If you expect something and it happens, you're not necessarily joyous anyway. You expected it. So I think it's about sort of staying on the side of flexibility, keeping your expectations in check.
Sorry.
Oh no, and always having room for joy.
So voyageurs and coureurs de bois would stop twice a day for a meal, and they would cook this up, and they would serve it with bannock. They might throw some rolled oats in if they had it to thicken it. just for a little more carbohydrate, and they would feast on this.
Mm-hmm.
It is delicious. Thank you both again so much for sharing and cooking and allowing us to have this wonderful conversation. It was so awesome.
Dreamspeakers is all First Nations people, including status, non-status, and the Métis. So.
And Inuit. And like
And
we said,
Inuit,
we're,
right, yeah.
And because we're an Indigenous international film festival, every year we're opening our idea of what Indigenous is and understanding, like we've had Russian filmmakers, Japanese filmmakers, we are always looking at what that means to the people. So we hope that people will come out. You don't have to be Indigenous, you don't have to be Métis, you could just enjoy the stew.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Hey everyone, just finished up with Dreamspeakers Festival Society. Joyce and Christine were amazing.
Insane.
We made the Rubaboo Stew.
Yes.
I hope I'm saying that correctly. And I'd never made that before, but Joyce was so wonderful in leading us through that process and really speaking about the history and the tradition that's accompanied with it, because I don't know, I feel like you could just think that it's just another
a stew.
But it's not.
Yeah. Like, we didn't plan that. No, I think it was amazing. Just hearing, like, the history and, like, the passion both of them had, and just the different, just the different people, but the same upbringings with, like, the culture and everything, and how they're talking about how they always had, like, just, like, small little things, like a cup of bacon grease on the counter, so you always, like, cook veggies with that, or, like, something. And I just think it's very sweet and very wholesome for them to be able to be so vulnerable and share all that stuff with us. Yeah.
I think it's also really cool too, just adding on to that, of how much deeper the culture goes for the Indigenous peoples and everything like that, because in school, we're taught a very, no offense Canada, but like kind of offense, we're taught a very basic level of like, and like I mentioned the one thing that had stuck with me, but it's like there's so much more than that. And that idea of a gift is better when you share it with other people, like that was so cute. I'm like, it's such a great way to look at things too, because I mean, it does get better when you share with people, because then you have like those conversations and you create that community and
like
have
those memories and
exactly. And it's so heartwarming, and I just loved talking with them, and I'm excited for the Dreamspeakers International Film Festival when it comes around, because I'll be sure to go check it out, as well as the art festival, the Rubaboo Art Festival, because that's also really cool. And there's so much great work just in our city that I mean, I've never gone and seen. So
yeah, it definitely goes what is it, overlooked?
Yeah,
it gets overlooked for sure. Yeah, I think it was amazing. I could honestly hear them speak about it for hours and hours. They were just so knowledgeable and like entertaining, and it was great to I love hearing people speak about their passions, and they were both very passionate.
Yeah, I literally almost ran us over time that we had with them, because I was just like so into the conversation and like all the questions that I was asking and the stories. That's, I think, my favorite thing about having spoken with them is it wasn't answers that they were giving, it was stories. And like obviously the answer was in the story or whatever, but it was a lot more interesting than does the festival run, XYZ answer and then end of conversation. Like it was very much like a learning in every single thing that we spoke about. And I'm very grateful for having had that experience and kind of having my eyes open to like a whole other world out there that I haven't necessarily like dove into.
Yeah, I agree.
So yeah, check it out.